Practical Tips for Successful Virtual Leadership, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Rick Lepsinger. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Before we begin, note you can submit any questions you have using the window chat area on your control panel. We will answer questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or as a follow-up by email. My name is Sarah Schaefer, and I will moderate today's webinar. Rick Lepsinger is a virtual team expert with more than 30 years of experience and a proven track record as a human resource consultant and executive. He is also president of the OnPoint Consulting. He is the author of several books on leadership and organizational effectiveness. Rick currently sits on the faculty of GE's Management Development course and leads the program, Making GE's Global Matrix Work. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Rick.
Sarah, thanks very much. And everyone, thank you. It's nice to have you here today. It's probably not unusual, and if you folks are attending this session, that what you've realized is that more and more leading in the 21st century means being able to work and collaborate with people who are not co-located or in the same physical location as you. Today, I'm going to focus on 3 areas that tend to be some of the most common challenges that are faced by virtual leaders. And those 3 are being able to plan and run high-quality virtual meetings, being able to build and sustain trust with people who you may not have met at all or may only meet face-to-face very infrequently, and we'll talk about being able to manage accountability from a distance as well. So why don't we just start off, and in the chat box, I think that's probably on the right-hand side of your screen, if you just take a moment and type in what's your greatest challenge. I just wanted to get a general sense of that from the group, and I'll also try to use that as kind of a guideline for my comments and general presentation overall. So if you just take a moment to type in what your greatest challenges are in the chat section, and I'll just see what those general themes are coming up there. Okay. So a few are starting to come in. I don't think you folks can see them all, but some general themes. Again, they're fairly consistent with on the meeting side. It's around people multitasking, maintaining attention. On the managing accountability, it's even knowing what people are doing. Seems to be a common thread overall. And on the trust side, it's around building relationships in general. So just to talk about that, what is really different about working in a virtual setting? Why can't you just do what you normally do when you lead and manage co-located teams and work with co-located colleagues? And there are 3 primary characteristics. And the first has to do with infrequent or no face-to-face contact. The lack of visual cues contributes a great deal to the potential for misunderstandings. And without FaceTime or actually meeting people, it's very hard to build a relationship, to build trust. Differences in time zones make it difficult to ensure that people who need to be involved in decisions and conversations are available and can be involved. It also causes delays in the movement of information and the sharing of ideas. And the reliance on technology is interesting because technology is actually an enabler of virtual teaming, yet it also creates some difficulties. It can distort the message, and people's familiarity or comfort with technology can also make interaction and communication a bit more challenging. So we wanted, excuse me, we wanted to understand why excuse me, we wanted to understand why some virtual teams and some virtual team leaders were more effective than others. We conducted a global study where we took a look at 48 virtual teams from a range of industries, and basically what we identified is two key things. One is a lot of virtual teams are underperforming. In our study, 25% of the virtual teams were not fully performing. There was an MIT study that was done at about the same time where 82% of the virtual teams were not effective. So wherever you happen to fall along that continuum, there is quite a bit of room for improvement. And if you think about, well, what are the contributing factors to virtual teams that struggle or underperform? One of them has to do with the effectiveness of the virtual leader. 50% of the stakeholders, meaning the recipients of a virtual team's product or service, and 33% of team members rated virtual leaders less than effective. And when we dug a little deeper to try to understand why, one of the things we found is that many organizations and many leaders themselves really just recycle the things that they found were effective for them when they were leading co-located teams or working with co-located colleagues without really a consideration for what makes virtual collaboration unique. And the findings from our study are in my book, Virtual Team Success, which has tips and guidelines and pointers, several of which I will share with you today as well. The differentiator we found for the teams and leaders that were highly effective was that they tended to be better at and more focused on four main areas: relationships, accountabilities, motivation, and purpose and process. And relationship is about building trust and connecting with people across time zones and across distance. Accountability is ensuring that expectations are clear, commitments are met, despite distance and time that separates people. Motivating is about recognizing and engaging individuals and teams, even though they're not co-located. And purpose and process is about establishing processes that support and facilitate virtual work and virtual interaction. In today's session, we're going to talk about those three areas that are in relationship, accountability, and purpose and process. So let's start with purpose and process and talk a little bit about conducting effective virtual meetings. And this is sort of the current state. There's been an 800% increase in virtual workers during the past 5 years. And it's really just starting to pick up speed. And this is not just virtual workers within the U.S., but it's also on a global basis. The use of virtual meetings has increased at 80% of companies are now interacting and using or needing to have some sort of virtual interaction and bringing people together who are not physically located together. However, only 62% of people who participate in virtual meetings are somewhat satisfied. And somewhat satisfied is like the mid-range. So that's not a particularly good assessment at all. And when you ask people what are their key challenges, 73% report that getting everyone engaged and multitasking are always or often the challenges that they deal with. So what can you do about that? Before we talk a little bit about how tips and guidelines and pointers for how you can handle it, let's see how you would deal with a couple of situations. So I'll show you a situation, and then I'll kind of give you three choices and see which one of those choices you would pick. So here's situation number one. Joan leads a team of 6 people, and they're geographically dispersed across North America, India, and Europe. Team members have recently been overwhelmed with work, and as a result, the team has had to push back several deadlines. And today, Joan scheduled a meeting to provide an update on one of the projects, which was the only item on the agenda. During the meeting, Joan noticed that there was very little participation and that people were not really paying attention for most of the call. So, what factors do you think contributed most to the low level of engagement during that meeting. And I'm going to open up a poll and give you folks a chance to select. All right, so take a look, pick the one that you think was the primary contributor. All right, and the votes are coming in now. I'll just give it another moment or two. All right, so select the one. Is it cultural preferences? Is it lack of consideration for the purpose of the meeting? Or is it team members' heavy workload that might have distracted them? All right, I'm going to close the poll right now. Oh, we got just wait a moment. They're still coming in. All right, good. I'll close the poll right there. Let me share the results. And it looks like the majority of you have picked team members' heavy workload, may have distracted them. A close second is a lack of consideration. And very few of you pick cultural preferences. And actually, in this particular case, the team members' heavy workload could in fact be a distraction, and that would be true for many situations. Although in this case, there was really an underlying reason for the lack of engagement, and it happens to be the lack of consideration for the purpose of the meeting. And the reason for that is that it was primarily a information pass session, and the meeting was merely updating and sharing information, and people tended to go on mute and not pay much attention to that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's take a look at the second situation. To capture their input, Joan invited 8 stakeholders to join the team's discussion about the pricing strategy for a new product. During the WebEx session, which is the collaborative software she was using, Joan encountered multiple problems. And one was people talking over each other. There were also long pauses when participants waited to see if other people were finished speaking. Joan wanted to encourage an open discussion, so she didn't facilitate the discussion and focused mostly on capturing key points. The meeting adjourned after an hour and a half. However, the group did not reach a decision about the pricing strategy. So which one of these factors do you think contributed most to problems that Joan was facing? And I'll open up that polling question. All right. So do you think it was the duration of the meeting? Was it the number of participants that were attending the meeting? Was it that no one facilitated the discussion effectively? Or was it the use of WebEx for this meeting format? All right, so the votes are coming in fairly quickly now. I'll just wait just a little bit longer. Okay, looks like they've slowed. I'll stop it right there. And let's see what we have. Right, the majority of you, yeah, you're all very good at this. 95%, no one facilitated the discussion effectively, which is absolutely correct. The other issues, like the meeting duration, as a matter of fact, this meeting was right within best practices for meeting duration. For number of participants, it was also within best practices. And in fact, the use of WebEx or collaborative tools actually can enhance and facilitate the meeting interaction. So let's talk specifically about what you can do to enhance your virtual meeting. And there's quite a few things you can do before the meeting even starts. And just a general consideration. It's important to confirm that the meeting's necessary. And one of the things that we found to be a best practice among highly effective virtual meetings is that they avoid calling a meeting just for information pass. And again, this may be a little counterintuitive for some people, but if you are bringing people together just to sort of go around the horn where people update the project, but there's no expectation for problem solving or decision making or a real exchange, the recommendation is find another way to share the information. Post it on a shared site, send it in an email, but don't require people to come on a phone call to wait their turn to do an update and then listen to everybody else. Find another way to do that. And here's some of the reasons why. 59% of leaders report they spend more time preparing for a status meeting than the actual meeting itself. So if your meeting is 2 hours, they're going to spend about 2 hours. So that's like a half a day that's killed just waiting to do an update, not to solve a problem, not to make a decision, but just to share information, of which there may be other ways to do that. But most damning is that 60% of respondents actually admit that they multitask during status update meetings. In some ways, we are training people, conditioning people to multitask because they're just waiting their turn and there's no expectation for interaction. A second thing is rotate the meeting times to accommodate time zone differences. Share the inconvenience so that you don't have some people who are always getting up early or staying up late, and you're kind of distributing that inconvenience across the team. The other best practice is to have shorter meetings, have more frequent, shorter meetings. When you've got a 2 or 3 hour meeting that's on the phone, even if you're using collaborative software, that can be very tedious. And it's really hard for people not to check their email for an extended period of time. So the idea is have more meetings that are more focused and shorter. 30 to 60, maybe 90 minutes would be all right. The idea here is that you're getting more focused attention to a tighter agenda where people's level of attention and engagement are higher for a shorter amount of time, right? So the problem, again, isn't so much too many meetings, it's too many bad meetings, and we're trying to avoid that. In addition to that, ensure that everyone that's on the call has an agenda item, is responsible for something on the call. If they don't know or aren't clear about why they're in attendance at the meeting, they might not have to attend. And it probably doesn't make sense to have people join without a clear reason or expectation for how they're going to contribute or how they're going to participate. It also helps to rotate the planning and facilitator role, so it's not always you as the team leader who are taking that responsibility. One is it contributes to engagement and commitment to the meeting, but it also helps people sort of understand what it looks like and what it means when people are not engaged. You want to manage the number of participants, and generally speaking, it's sort of 7 plus or minus 2. If you have a larger team, what you might want to do is identify sort of a core team and then have sort of ad hoc groups around that you would bring people in when they were needed. Another idea is around posting photos of people on a whiteboard so people can connect a name with a face. Using video is also helpful, but even just a photo so we can see who we're talking to goes a long way to being able to help people connect and feel more comfortable. On the logistics side, sending materials ahead is a good practice in general, posting them on a shared site so everybody can get them. And the idea here is that especially if it's a multinational, cross-cultural team, you want to give people a chance to read and prepare for the conversation. Another best practice is around creating a level playing field. And this is somewhat, you might say, controversial or a little counterintuitive. But one of the problems is if you have some members of the team who are co-located and they're together in the conference room and other members that are on the phone sort of, you know, in geographically distributed locations. The idea here would be to have a level playing field that have everybody get on the phone or the video, not have people who are in the room. Because what's happening is the people in the room are engaged and interacting, and they frequently ignore or leave out the people that are on the phone, or the people on the phone have to push their way in. The idea here is you can also take advantage of the collaborative software to help manage the conversation. And you want to match the technology with the task. You want to pick the right technology for the objective or the purpose of the meeting overall. And what you see here is just a quick kind of overview that tries to identify the type of technology that would work well with various tasks. The main message here is that the more complex the task, the richer the medium needs to be. So as you, at the least complex, where you're sharing ideas or sharing information, email, the phone might be fine. Shared sites like SharePoint would be fine as well. As you move down the list in terms of complexity, where you're making decisions, resolving conflicts, or building relationships, you want to move to a richer environment. And face-to-face would be the best if you can, but video conferencing is a great substitute because it gets at the lack of visual cues and allows people to connect a bit better. During the meeting, there are the primary thing that we'll focus on today is around increasing engagement. And there are 3 levers you can use to help increase people's engagement during the meeting. In addition to what you've already done as part of the preparation for the meeting. Making time for building relationships, ensuring some sort of interaction during the session, and providing tools for people overall. So let's take a look at the first around building relationships. One of the things that many high-performing virtual leaders do is they actually build time into the agenda for that informal water cooler kind of interaction. Rather than trying to jam it into an already tight agenda, they'll allocate 5-10 minutes just for the small talk and interaction as people join. And as people join, you might want to greet them, start to make a little small talk, and kind of make that part of your agenda. Take a personal interest, just as if you were seeing them in the office. Engage them in conversations about, their vacation, the weather, the commute in. The same as what you would do if you were in the same room. And it's interesting, for some reason, we tend to be much more task-focused when we're operating virtually. The niceties of the interpersonal interactions when we're face-to-face don't get as much attention when we're operating virtually. The idea of empathizing, to check in with people, to see how they're doing, doesn't get the time that it does when you're face-to-face with people. And you can also think of ways to establish processes to build trust in relationships, various group activities, or even have breakout groups if your collaborative software allows you to do that. On the ensuring interaction, we talked about only scheduling virtual meetings for problem solving and decision making. If you're not requiring some engagement, and it's not just about the interpersonal side, but really around solving a problem, making a decision, find another way to share the information. Keep the meeting short, ensure everyone knows why they're on the call and what their role is. Set the expectation in advance that you expect people to participate and to be engaged in the interaction. Make it part of the requirement and let people know that's happening. Vary the way you solicit input. You can use polling questions, the yes or no buttons, the chat section. Again, if it's multinational, some people are more comfortable with a polling question or a yes or no button than speaking. And it also allows you to collect people's perspectives in a confidential, anonymous way, which also can increase people's level of participation and interaction. The use of brainstorming or breakout groups to encourage participation, recording people's comments on a whiteboard so everybody can see what's being said and track it at the same time. For smaller groups, we encourage you to ask people to come off of mute. Now again, it's a little counterintuitive, and some people work at home and have got the dog and the kids, but for a smaller group, if you can have people stay off of mute, it really does increase their level of engagement, because when you're on mute and you're typing, right, which you know that you're doing that, when you're off mute, I can hear you type, right? I was just on a session recently where a guy joined the session and he went on mute. He was on his other phone talking, and I took him off of mute to ask him a question, and I could hear him talking on his other phone, but he couldn't hear me because he wasn't on the line anymore. So the idea of keeping people off of mute really does increase interaction. And you want to provide color commentary. Describe what's going on. It's a little bit like a sporting event on TV, on the radio, where you're somebody trying to paint a picture of what's happening. like when there's a polling question, you're letting people know, how many returns are in or where people are, that type of thing, also keeps people engaged. Tools also help with the interaction. Asking people to use the hand icon. A lot of collaborative software has some way to sort of raise your hand, which allows you to manage the conversation and keep people from talking over each other. Video capability is a tremendous asset, and many collaborative software tools, whether it's Link or WebEx or Adobe or GoToMeeting, all have video capability that allow you to get visual cues, see people, connect faces with names and comments. The overall use of collaborative software is a tremendous advantage. It also allows everyone to look at the same material at the same time and be able to follow along, which is another reason why it's nice to have that level playing field where you don't have some people on the phone and some people in the room. This way we can all see the same thing at the same time. Using a whiteboard to take notes, recording ideas, again, as a way to engage people and track discussions. In some collaborative software sites, people can actually type their own comments on the whiteboard, which it's not just a facilitator, which enhances their interaction and their engagement. Sharing the minutes on the screen, using chat or IM functionality to help people connect in general. At the end of the meeting, you want to clarify expectations and instructions for next steps. This is important in any meeting situation, but in a virtual setting, it's particularly important because, again, you don't have visual cues. You can't always see what people are doing. When you're face-to-face, people pick up on things. They sort of nod and look. They kind of know what's going on. With the virtual setting, you have to be much more explicit. In many of your virtual meetings, they may be cross-cultural in nature, where you're working with people from around the world. And although each culture has its specific characteristics and attributes that you should be familiar with, there are some general tips that can help you work more effectively in a multicultural meeting or situation. One is to distribute a world calendar so people are aware of holidays and vacation periods in other countries, so they don't schedule meetings during periods where people cannot be available. You might also want to allow more time to cover a point, so your agendas might not be quite as tightly packed, to leave a little bit more time for people to make their point and to get through various items. It's also helpful to provide transitions from one topic to the next, summarizing key points and next steps at the end of the meeting, and that sort of helps people transition from topic to topic. And around the cultural differences, some cultures like to break in, to ask questions. Others prefer to have more harmony and never disagree. So you may want to think about both gently encouraging people to express their opinion if you think they're holding back, but also providing things like polling questions, chat sections that make it easier for people to contribute, but also consider the reaction of others before you interrupt or cut in on what they're saying. Some cultures are more or less formal, so you might want to confirm how people like to be addressed, and if you're not sure, it might be better to start out being a little bit more formal. Different cultures place different importance on punctuality and timing, and it's important for you to be flexible. You might even want to consider that in your timing of your agenda if you know that people tend to come a bit later just because that's the nature of how they approach it. And some cultures value speed of decision making, while others tend to be more inclusive. And the key here is to find some midpoint that balances cultural sensitivity with efficiency. And you're just trying to find a point where everyone is a bit more comfortable. So let's talk a little bit about building trust. And this is really a key foundational element for all interactions. If you're going to coach, provide feedback, for building relationships, for influencing, for managing conflict, trust becomes an essential element to being able to do that well. And we know that trust is a key component of team interaction. If you want to have confidence that people will share information, say what's on their mind, contribute to the decision-making conversation, you need higher levels of trust in general. What we do know is that high levels of trust tend to boost engagement, leading to increased performance, greater levels of personal initiative, and more proactive behavior, which is critical in a virtual environment where you're not there to observe or supervise. You really need them to take personal initiative and be much more proactive. So here's the current state. A study was done, 600 respondents. 81% reported that their greatest personal challenge was the difficulty establishing rapport and trust. And that's not surprising if you realize that 46% never met their other virtual team members face-to-face, and only 30% meet once a year. With that frequency of interaction, it's very difficult to establish a solid relationship and higher levels of trust. And it's one of the key differences of virtual versus co-located work. As a result, it sort of cascades. Because of the lower levels of trust, virtual teams are more challenging than face-to-face teams when it comes to managing conflict, making decisions, and expressing your opinions. So if you're looking for people to engage, trust becomes an important prerequisite. We know that top-performing virtual teams had significantly higher levels of task-based trust, meaning confidence that team members will do their job. However, it's the interpersonal-based trust that's more difficult to establish, but it's not impossible. And we'll talk a little bit about some guidelines and tips for making that happen. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by trust. And trust is not simply putting aside your concerns and hoping that people will do what they say they will do. Trust is something that you can build, you can sustain, you can earn, and it's made up of 4 key components: credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. Credibility is about your credentials. It's your background, it's your track record, it's your education, it's your history of success. And in addition, and I would say even more importantly, it's the extent to which people believe you speak the truth. When you present an idea or make a proposal, do you give a balanced view of its pros and its cons? Or do you tend to put sort of a hyper-positive spin on it and selectively disclose the downside in order to gain people's excitement and enthusiasm? The more people believe that you are a straight talker and give a balanced view, the greater your credibility. Reliability is about being dependable, doing what you say you will do, but it's also about being predictable. In other words, it's being dependable across situations. It's not just being dependable when it's important to you, but it's also being dependable when it's important to the other people. Can people have a sense of and anticipate how you will react and behave? The next 2 are much more on the interpersonal side. Credibility and reliability tend to be more on the task side. Intimacy and self-orientation are more on the interpersonal side. Intimacy is about discretion, not disclosing information you've been asked to keep confidential, but it's also about demonstrating empathy. In a virtual world, empathy is the primary way that you connect with people. It's the primary, demonstrating that you understand their situation, the constraints, the pressure that they're under, and why they would be behaving the way they are. That's the way we connect in a virtual setting. Orientation is around your motives and attention. Do you focus on your needs and goals, or do you focus on the needs and goals of others? A high self-orientation is more focused on your own needs and goals. A low self-orientation is focusing on the needs and goals of others. And that ends up being particularly important because even if you are highly credible, highly reliable, and people even like you and feel that they connect with you, if they believe that your attention is primarily focused on your needs and goals, and maybe even at the expense of theirs, that tends to diminish their perception of your trustworthiness a great deal. So what can you do to build trust in a virtual setting? When it comes to credibility, frankly, don't lie. Speak the truth. Avoid exaggeration. Answer direct questions with direct answers. Admit when you don't know something. It's a little counterintuitive, but admitting you don't know something actually enhances your credibility in your areas of expertise. And it also helps to partner with team members in different locations and rotate those partnerships to give you a chance to both get to know them, but to also demonstrate expertise by being able to help people find solutions to their problems overall. Reliability is about making smaller promises. Don't just commit to the final outcome, but commit to key milestones along the way. Using other people's terminology makes you more familiar. A consistent work process makes you more predictable overall. Simple tools like role clarification tools and action plans clarifies expectations. And most importantly, make your work visible. In a virtual world, if I can't see you working, I'm positive you are not working. At least you're not working on my stuff. So if you can take advantage of shared spaces and other means to be able to help people see what you have accomplished and the progress you are making. On the intimacy side, we talked about demonstrating empathy. Also, you might set up a team page where people can get, see pictures, get a sense of people's background. If you can meet face-to-face, that's great. Even one face-to-face meeting lays the groundwork for more effective interactions going forward. The key also is to act as if you were co-located and call periodically to have non-work conversations, either on the phone or instant messaging. And people think I'm weird when I say that, but if you were co-located, you would walk into someone's space, their office, their cubicle, just to chat about the commute, the weather, some graduation, a wedding. Virtually, we don't do that, but the best virtual leaders really compensate for that lack of spontaneity when you're co-located, and they find time and ways to call people just to chat, not to necessarily talk about work. Although the call may drift into work, the primary purpose is to just connect with people. Self-orientation, try not to interrupt. There's nothing like interrupting that says, I'm more important than what you're saying isn't. Identify shared goals and common ground. That way you can talk about our goals rather than my goals. And it's helpful to remember that it's not always about you. Sometimes the other person's priority really does need attention now when you take a broader view and put it in context, and your priority really should come second or behind that. The last topic we'll talk about today is managing accountability remotely. And here again, accountability is about everybody pulling their weight, everybody focused on team performance and making their contribution to achieving team outcomes overall. When we talk about accountability, the classic definition is about accepting responsibility and not blaming others. Absolutely an important part of it. However, in addition, when people are acting with very high levels of accountability, it looks a lot like taking initiative, being proactive about fixing problems that and the cause of which may not be yours, ensuring that projects come in on time and on budget, overcoming obstacles that may not be your fault to begin with. Accountability is a little bit different in a virtual setting, and one primary difference is that autonomy becomes essential. The focus is on meeting deadlines and quality, and that's much more important than when people actually work. Again, this becomes a challenge for many virtual leaders and virtual team members to be able to shift their view. We're very used to seeing people clock in at a certain time and leave at a certain time. Virtual setting, you both can't do that, and it's not as important. Focusing on quality and timing is the essential measure of effectiveness, which means that you might need to focus on different metrics, focusing on outcome metrics rather than activity metrics. It's also more difficult to monitor and discuss progress, and you need to find a way to do that in an efficient way, and I'll show you a tool for that. And team members' contributions tend to be less visible, which contributes to social loafing. Social loafing means that when people believe that their contribution cannot be connected to the ultimate deliverable, they tend to put in less effort and take less accountability. And in the virtual world, that becomes a real challenge. And the lack of proximity makes it difficult for people to get updated quickly when priorities change and things shift. So before I talk about the two tools, let's see how you would handle this situation in terms of managing accountability of one of your virtual workers. Through your efforts to understand the reason for the team's performance plateau, it's come to your attention that David has been consistently missing deadlines. He missed 2 important deadlines recently, which caused a delay in a product release. David's performance is negatively impacting the team, and you need to take some action. However, David does not report directly to you, and managing this may be difficult. David's manager is your colleague, Pamela Jones. Although he is a member of your team, he is still and responsible to you. He reports to someone else. So let's take a look and see what your choices are. Here are 4 choices, and in this case, several of them are considered quite good. One of them would be considered the best in this situation, right? So take a second to look at these, and I will open up the polling question, and let's see which one you think is the best way to handle this situation. Is it calling Pamela Jones to discuss ways to improve it? Is it sending him an email about the impact? Is it asking him how he got off track and how he's going to fix it? Or is it clarifying performance expectations? Or holding a team meeting and discussing the importance of deadlines and solutions? All right, so they're coming in now. I'll just give it another moment or two, give you folks a chance to vote. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. We have quite a few votes in there. Thank you very much. Let's see what we did. All right, so it looks like the majority of you picked C, which is the clarify performance expectations and setting checkpoints overall, which is actually a great choice and one of the key things to do. And the next in line was to ask him how he got off of track. So in fact, it turns out that in this particular case, although D is a great choice, clarify your expectation for his performance and for the current project, agree on periodic checkpoints, is critical. The assumption is you would have done that on the front end, and you should certainly do it going forward. In this particular case, C is considered slightly better. D is great. C is slightly better because you're asking David to take responsibility right now for a problem that he's having going forward. How is he going to get things back on track? What is he going to do in the future to keep that from happening again? So there are 4 key accountability mistakes that people tend to make. One is they, in a virtual setting as well, they talk about the idea, but they don't agree on actions and specific accountability by names. And again, people assume someone else is going to do it, and that can be particularly easy to happen when we're not together in a room to make eye contact with each other. We agree on an action, but we're not clear about the completion date, so it's sort of open for interpretation. The third is we wait until the completion date because we're afraid of being seen as a micromanager, and we don't check on the results until the due date, and we might not even check at all if we get distracted and busy. And the fourth is that we don't hold people accountable. When they miss the commitment, we hand it off to one of our top performers who we trust, or we take it on ourselves. So here's the first tool, and it's about setting people up for success. It's increasing the likelihood that they will be able to successfully meet their commitment, and it makes it possible to have a constructive conversation in the event that they miss their commitment. Action is about the expectation and the task. What do you need people to do? What does good look like? Timetable is a specific due date, and checkpoints are mutually agreed upon milestones when you will check in with the person to do sort of a progress check. Let's talk about what that looks like in a virtual setting. There's a number of tools that can help you on the action side. Action planning software, team project management sites can help you clarify expectations and who is accountable. It also makes that more transparent. They also provide a place to store documents and communications which facilitate the movement of information, again, across geographic boundaries. On the timetable side, these same tools can help you set specific deadlines. When they're posted on an action plan, it gets at the social loafing side. The more you're transparent about who's supposed to do what and when it's due, tends to increase people's desire to be accountable, because we all know what we're all supposed to be doing. You can also use automatic reminders, a week before, to let people know that something is coming up so they're not caught by surprise. Checkpoints are a simple tool, but they are very powerful. One is, if you agree on the milestones ahead of time, you don't have to worry about being seen as a micromanager because you've agreed together. It's not like you're just sort of popping in to say, how is it going? But it also integrates project management with coaching. You don't have to find an extra time to do the coaching piece, and it also provides an opportunity to build trust and to build relationships. So you're building in the interpersonal opportunity, the time to engage with people, but it's part of the project, so it's not necessarily taking additional time, and it's work that you would try to do anyway. The second tool are the 3 coaching questions. These questions are perfect for encouraging people to take accountability and making it possible for them to take accountability. You can use these questions during your checkpoints when you're trying to do the course corrections if people have missed a deadline, or you can do it at the end if people have missed a commitment or dropped the ball. The first question is looking back. What could you have done to prevent the problem? How did you contribute to this problem going forward? The second question is, what are you going to do right now to get this on track? And again, you'll notice that this turns it into a problem-solving conversation rather than a blaming conversation. It gets them engaged in figuring out what to do. The future question is also important. What can you do to prevent this from happening again? Now, some people might say, I couldn't do what I wanted to do because the other group didn't give me what I needed. And they may make an excuse, or what sounds like an excuse. But the truth is that might also be true. It may be an excuse, but it might also be true. This question encourages them to think about what they're going to do to keep this event, which might happen again, from causing them to miss a commitment or interrupt the flow of the work or the meeting of a particular deadline. You want them to think about how they're going to address that reason why they couldn't do it. So some key tips around managing accountability. It's critical in a virtual world to be deliberate and intentional about reinforcing and updating team goals and individual responsibilities. The lack of physical proximity means some people don't pick up on that. Leverage technology to track progress on assignments. If you can't see people, the technology can help you get a sense of where they are. Use meaningful metrics to connect people to the work and to be more visible. Ensure transparency so that individual goals and project goals are clear to everyone. Again, it connects people to the work, and it's motivating, and it gets at the social loafing. If you can't interact with people on a regular basis on the team, focus on stakeholders to assess the team's level of performance. Encourage a problem-solving attitude. Watch your own language and how you talk about other groups and what they do or haven't done. Use the checkpoints as coachable moments, and at those coachable moments you can do course corrections rather than waiting until the due date and finding out that people have missed their commitment. You can check in periodically, get people back on track. And these checkpoints become an opportunity to build relationship and to build trust. And it's critical to reinforce positive behaviors. Deal with below standard performance in a timely manner. In a virtual world, we're more inclined, or it's easier, to put that off. So a couple of closing words before we open it up to questions. And what do we know about great virtual leaders, especially related to these three areas around virtual meetings, building trust, and managing accountability? One is that great virtual leaders make effective use of technology to bridge that gap, not just emails or instant messaging, but the collaborative software and video. They foster an atmosphere of collaboration among team members. They don't just build trust and relationships between them and the members of the team, but they find ways to facilitate building trust and relationships among the team members themselves. They ensure that everyone is engaged and participates in team discussions, which has to do with planning on the front end of the virtual meeting and how they facilitate and conduct the meeting while it's happening. They communicate team goals and directions and create a sense of purpose. Sense of purpose is really what unifies a group of people that don't have contact with each other, that don't have that impromptu social interaction. What brings us together? It's that shared purpose overall. They put processes in place to facilitate information sharing. In a co-located world, we know about things, we find out about things, we get things across our desk. In a virtual world, you have to be deliberate and conscientious about building processes that will ensure the right people get the information they need and the right people are involved in decisions. Hold virtual team members accountable for results. Don't let distance or time zones cause you to let people slide when they miss commitments. And as a virtual leader, to ask for ongoing feedback from your team members, from the stakeholders, in terms of how the meetings are going, as well as how your ongoing interactions are going. So with that, thanks everyone. I will now turn it over to Sarah, who will talk about some of the Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Rick. That was really great. We do have time for Rick to answer some of your questions. So attendees, can you please use your chat window to send us those now? And while we wait for those questions to come in, please take a moment to note down how to keep in touch. You can always check out HRDQ-U.com, and there you can register for our next webinar. You can also use your special offer you receive by mail after our session to shop at HRDQstore.com, as well as connect with us on social media. And then also on that slide, you can reach, Rick can be reached at his website as well as on LinkedIn and Twitter. Rick's book, which is the foundation of today's presentation, you see pictured here, Virtual Team Success, can be found on Amazon as well. And it looks like we have a number of questions coming in, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Our first question is from Jane, and she wants to know, how do you confirm that participants are paying attention?
Right. Okay. And there's a couple of ways. One has to do with just the technology itself. Some of you may be aware that on tools like WebEx, for instance, and on Adobe Connect, they have what they call an attention meter. So for WebEx, as an example, when people go off of my screen, a little exclamation point appears next to their name on the host's board, so only the host can see it. Now, again, I don't know what they're doing, but I know they're not looking at whatever it is I'm showing on the screen. The other thing around if you know how they're the extent to which they're participating, has to do with using a variety of techniques like polling questions and chat sections. And again, on the polling question, you can't see who's responding, but you can see how many people are responding. And the chat section usually has people's names. So if you're looking for a variety of ways to engage people and involve people, you can get a better sense of, are they participating? And the third thing is make sure they have an objective or a real agenda item for the meeting, and they know why they're there, and that will also increase their participation overall.
Okay, wonderful. And it looks like our next question is from Shanitha, and she wants to know, how can you identify work styles when working virtually? For example, direct versus indirect.
Right. Yeah, again, that can be a bit of a challenge. In some ways, you would do it in a similar way that you would do it if you were co-located. Unfortunately, you don't have the visual cues, but you can tell by the way people engage in conversations, the way they conduct themselves both during the meeting and the way they handle their work. So some of the same cues you'd be looking for, even if they're geographically distributed. The challenge you have, though, is that you just don't have the visual cue when you're interacting. The way to overcome that is to make greater use of video so you can actually see the person engage with you.
Okay, great. And our next question comes from Stephanie, and she asks, how can I monitor what my people are doing in my absence?
Right. Well, again, the main thing here, we talked a little bit about autonomy. If you are, in fact, clear about expectations, so what are the key goals, what needs to be done by a certain time and the key deadlines, and if people have some sense of what good looks like, that then enables you to step back a little bit, and then if you're able to do the periodic check-in. So you don't really have to physically be there all the time to see people working, but then it comes down to managing their performance. So when people are, in fact, working toward expectations and accomplishing goals and meeting your expectations, they get the positive feedback. People who miss the expectation, don't perform to expectation, need to get the feedback. In a virtual setting, that becomes even more important to let people know where they are, because they don't have a lot of other cues to know when they're on or off track. So in some ways, it's setting expectations so people know what they need to do, and then providing feedback to reinforce positive behaviors and consequences when they drop the ball.
All right, perfect. And I think we have time for one more question. And this question comes from Bobby. How do you find group activities that can be done on phone meetings with your team?
Yeah, it's a little bit harder with the phone, but just as an example, we posted an infographic on our website. It was directed toward holiday parties, but it was a way to engage people and have people interact. One idea that we got from a virtual leader was using texting and instant messaging. So, for example, during a soccer game, during the World Cup, they had people, they were actually talking to each other around the world about what was going on during a particular game that they were watching. So the telephone limits you a bit, but if you open it up to things like texting, instant messaging, and even collaborative software. The other thing you can do on the phone, just thinking about it now, even if you had a coffee break, or even sort of like a, let's call it a coffee break, where people either drink the beverage of their choice or have the snack of their choice and share something of the culture. Even though it's over the phone, people can still be doing it at the same time. Not quite as good as if it's a conference call, but it still gets at that idea.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Rick, for sharing with us today. It is always a pleasure.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. And everyone, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today. Hopefully you got one or two things out of it that you can make use of.
All right, great. Thank you. And if we did not get to answer your questions, you will receive an emailed response probably later next week. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative.